So hopefully by now we've understood why looking at health promotion or just health or the human body or society or just complex problems in general through a simplistic lens only gets us so far, and we never really get to the heart of the issue if we're just using those reductionist simplistic lenses. So then what do you do? If a problem is so complex, how do you actually handle it? What do you actually do about it? How do you get people to be more physically active? How do you reduce obesity rates? How do you reduce smoking rates? How do you do something about climate change? These are complex problems, some more complex than others. What do you actually do about it? Well, quite honestly, for a lot of us and for a lot of these problems, I think a common response is just to be like, I don't know. Like, what do we even do about it? Like, especially something like climate change. I don't have the expertise at all, and it can feel very overwhelming, and I'm just like, it can lead to despair. It can lead to a loss of hope. It can lead to just like blaming boomers or blaming, the oil industry or whoever else. It could lead to a lot of that blame, or simple solutions, just recycle more or something like that. But it's not really getting to the heart of a problem. So I understand that these are common responses, and obesity is the one that I'm the most interested in, and there are no simple solutions to the current rates of obesity in our society, or even at the individual level, how to do something about that, in the long term. That's not very cost prohibitive. There's no real simple solutions to that. So one thing that I think is important is that if a system is complex, we don't want to reduce it. We don't want to think simplistically, but you just have to embrace the complexity. You just have to embrace that it's complex. You have to embrace that human behavior is complex, that health promotion is complex work, that it's not going to be obvious what the solution is. If there was an obvious solution to homelessness, if there was an obvious solution to climate change, if there was an obvious solution to the opioid epidemic, we would have come up with that by now. Okay? But that doesn't mean we just don't do anything about it either in health promotion. But we have to embrace complexity, and then let's see what we can do about it. Okay? So remember that in a reductionist way of thinking, we're just going to look at the parts. We're just going to try to solve the problem based on a single part. We think everything is clear and organized, and we think that maybe it's other people's problem to fix. Like with obesity, it's your fault. There's a simple solution. Just fix it, and just eat less and move more, and that's the simple solution. That's a reductionist approach. But a systems thinking approach, as we've talked about earlier, focuses on how things are linked together. How does one behavior lead to another? How does one action lead to another? How does genetics predispose? How does epigenetics predispose? How does physiology predispose? How does physiology impact mental health? We're looking at all these different things as well. And one of our goals isn't necessarily at first overall to necessarily solve the problem, but with a systems thinking approach, we first want to understand the problem well. Right? That's a place to start, is what is actually going on, and how do we understand this problem conceptually so we can start looking for places to intervene. Okay? A systems thinking approach as well, multiple causes to that particular outcome. There's no simple solution, and then context matters as well. And as far as a systems thinking approach, everyone is responsible for it. Obesity is not an individual failure, right? The big thing that's changed in the past 100 years is that people have lost willpower and have no sense of control. That just occurred in 100 years. No, it's our system that's promoting obesity. It is very easy to make obesogenic decisions than it was 100 years ago. It's very easy to eat a lot and to not move nowadays. So it's all of our problem, not just the problem of some individuals. Okay? So I love this slide because I think it really does a good job of helping us understand how we approach problems differently using a simple, complicated, and a complex systems lens. So Simple problem, simple solution. Complicated problem, more complicated solution. Complex problem, more of a complex system solution. Okay, so let's go through these. So simple problem, if we're talking about cars, how do I roll down the windows in a car? Okay, so that's a problem. It's simple. What's the solution? You press the button. Or if you're in one of those older cars, you roll down the little window thingy, handle thingy. Okay, simple problem, simple approach, right? Question, how do I do a bicep curl? Okay, so I'm not great at instructing this, I'm not a personal trainer, but you do this. That's how you do a bicep curl, right? Maybe there's a little bit more specifics in there, but the question is simple, the approach is simple, okay? Complicated, how do I stop my car from blowing smoke? Well, that's complicated because there's lots of different reasons why that car might be blowing smoke, and someone's going to need to have some expertise in cars in order to solve it. But there is a solution, right? With simple and complicated problems, they are inherently knowable. You can figure out how to launch a rocket into space. I can't, but experts can. You can figure out how to stop a car from blowing smoke. I can't, but a mechanic expert can, right? So the approach for an expert in this area would be like disassemble it and either, tune the air fuel mix or replace the head gasket. Sure. I don't even know what those mean, but sure. Right? There's an approach to it, right? You need some expertise. It's not obvious right away, but it's knowable. The solution is knowable. The problem is knowable, okay? But a complex problem, it's inherently unknowable, the solution. You can't just figure it out from even looking at the evidence necessarily is going to tell you exactly how you're going to be able to do that. How will car drivers react to a self-driving car on the street? We have no idea until we start doing it, until we actually roll out. We can guess, but we really need to put one on the streets and see how drivers respond. So I like a complex systems approach as well because it is about action too. It's about trying things out and seeing how they go, this trial and error type approach. And then, in this class, we're going to talk a lot about building your health promotion strategy and then evaluating it, right? So you can rely on the best evidence and try to build your best health promotion strategy, and you think of all the thing. This is the pre-seed proceed model I'm using here. You can think of the best ways to roll it out. You even think of implementation science and how to actually do that, and you've got your intervention locked in and you're that's the one, and I think it's going to work because I really understand my population and I really understand the problem and I've found these leverage points, and now I'm going to roll it out, but you don't know how it's going to go. You don't know how people are going to respond. And then you also don't know how different people are going to respond. How people are going to respond differently to that intervention unless you start rolling it out, right? Which again is why health promotion is a lot more focused on implementation science and evaluation these days. We learn through evaluation. We learn through the feedback from actually doing something. Right? We still need expertise to help us figure out what's the best way to do something, but we're only going to really figure things out as best as we can by sometimes rolling it out. Okay? So to add a layer to this that I think is really important in our discussion of complex systems and solution to complex systems, I love this quote here again from Diane Feingood: to truly embrace the notion of complexity and adopt a solution-oriented approach, our mental models will have to help us shed dependency on causality and shift to complexity as a way of knowing. So if we're really going to solve complex problems, we have to shift the way we think of it. We have to shift our paradigms about the system. And one of the major paradigms that we need to shift is from a simplistic, reductionist views of these complex problems to more of a complex systems view of these problems. That's one part of shifting these mental models. Okay, so mental models are they're your deepest held beliefs. This is how we understand the world. And if, again, one example of a mental model is do you have a simplistic view of health and health behaviors, or do you have more of a complex systems view of health and health behaviors, right? How do you view people that are sedentary? I'll give you another example actually of this. I once asked my class, right after COVID, I asked my 340 health promotion class, I was like, so why would someone choose not to get vaccinated? And I had one student put her hand up and she's like, well, they're selfish. She said, everyone that chooses not to get vaccinated is selfish. And I'm like, okay, I see why you might think that, but really? Is that the only reason why someone might choose not to get vaccinated? We all, first of all, we're all a little selfish. First and foremost, we're all selfish, and we should be at least a little bit selfish. And by selfish, I mean we have to understand our own interests and like take those into account, right? Because we can't help other people unless we help ourselves too. And it's important that we're good. But anyways, but like that was a very reductionist, simplistic view of the problem. And that doesn't get us anywhere. And if that's your mental model, that everyone that chooses not to get a vaccine is selfish, well then like where do you even go from there? Like how are you going to make a difference? We have to broaden our view of these things and again try to understand the problem from multiple angles and from a complex system perspective, but also taking into account the lived experiences of people and the deepest health beliefs of other people as well. Right? Other deepest held beliefs or mental models, like do you think that people are generally good or generally bad? Right? Another mental model, do you believe in the existence of a higher power or do you believe something else? And, you know, depending on, it's a little more worldview-y as well, but like depending on whether you have a spiritual perspective of life, like a lot of things build out of that. And either way, like this isn't a good or bad thing. I'm just saying like, it's these deepest held beliefs that inform how we do things and how we look at the world. And we have to understand where we're starting from with our own mental models and our own paradigms about how things work if we're going to start thinking about things a bit differently, if we're going to start making a difference, you know, and making this world a better place, which is, I think, what a lot of us really want to do. Okay, so these models have a major impact on how we view the world, how we come up with questions and answers, and what we do. And like, you know, mental models also speak to like how you see people that look differently than you do, right? That are in a different sized body than you have, how you view people that are like from different countries. You know, we have mental models and how you view like males, females, and people that don't identify with either of those terms. You know, how we view these things impacts how we view other things and impacts the approach we take with people and things. And so it's always important to examine our own biases and our own ways of looking at the world. And I would just say, be open to that not being the only way to see the world. And be open to the fact that you have biases that impact your way of seeing things and that they're not necessarily correct. They're not maybe bad or immoral or wrong either, but there's multiple ways of seeing the world. And our mental models are going to shape how we do a lot of things in our lives. So I think it's always a good idea to examine those mental models, especially when we're doing work that has to do with helping people, right? Like if you have a mental model about a particular group of people from, let's pick like older people. If you think all older people are a certain way, that's going to impact how you develop your health promotion campaign. So we have to think about these things, right? So in health promotion and in like, you know, doing this work of trying to make the world a better place and everything else, you know, we often focus on like what's actually happening and maybe patterns and trends. And, you know, in complex systems thinking, we do want to look at patterns and trends, but you also want to like below the surface, there's all these other things going on as well, like the structure of a system, how that system is linked together, who has power in a system, how like that power is distributed, what hierarchies exist in a system, you know, who has influence, who gets information, who doesn't get information. This might be a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but like a system structure, like there's systems, I'll go back to obesity. The obesity system, our environment, our world, which it promotes obesity. It's set up in a way to keep promoting obesity. And if we don't look at the structural elements that are, and the system structure, I should say, the structure of that system that keeps promoting obesity, right? We can move like one little part here and one little part there and one little part there, but the system's not going to change. It's going to keep reinforcing people eating a lot and not moving a lot too. And kind of what's below that, and systems and structures are often built of our mental models. What's below that is these mental models, right? So the mental model around obesity often is that it's simple and that it's the individual's fault. It's due to a lack of willpower, a lack of motivation, a lack of whatever, right? And that it's completely the individual's fault. And if we keep taking it's an individual's fault approach to it, well then the way we're going to structure our system is that like, well, you know, these food companies and these marketers and, you know, the built environment and all these different like elements of the system that are structured in a particular way, they're going to keep being structured away, right? Because it's not the system's fault, it's the individual's fault. But when we shift our mental model around obesity or whatever it is, we start looking at the problem differently. And ideally, that's one of the best ways that we can shift our system structure and like what's actually visible as well. Okay, so part of what we want to do in a complex systems approach is reframe the problem. And let's say you're working with an individual, keep picking on obesity and weight, maybe you're a personal trainer, and someone comes to you and they're like, you know, they're really down on themselves about their weight. They're like, I know it's my own fault. I know I have no willpower. I know I suck. I know and they're just really down on themselves about that whole thing. One of the things you can help facilitate is a reframing of those mental models, because those mental models might keep a person stuck in those current patterns of behaviors and the current systems that they've structured for themselves to keep reinforcing that behavior. But if we reframe the problem as like, well, actually, it's actually hard. You know, it's not all your fault. You know, yes, you have agency, but, you know, your body is set up in a way perhaps to have a higher appetite. The environment is set up in a way to help promote eating a lot more and moving a lot less. So it's actually not surprising that like you're one of the 2/3 of Canadians that have a BMI over 25. 2/3 of our population. You're not the only one. Our system is set up to promote obesity, and so unsurprisingly, you have it. Okay, so you can't do anything about the system so much, but we can start figuring out like what's going on with you, and reframing it not just like as a loss of like willpower and like you suck and it's all your fault and it should be so simple, but like let's understand the complexity that's going on. Let's figure out like what's going on in your body, what's going on in your mind, what went on in your past, and what can we actually like start trialing and erroring, right? Trying out to see what might work for you. And then you add more people, you start working with groups, and you start working with populations. That becomes more and more complex. Okay, so one of the things that can help, I kind of gave an example of model building right now at more of the individual level. And if you're doing health coaching, that's something that you might not want to do it to the extent that we're going to show it, but that's something that you might want to think about is like building kind of maybe a conceptual model for yourself or for that person as to like why they're currently behaving the way they do, right? Understanding their own set of influences that are leading to that behavior. So then we can start thinking about like leverage points, like what's actually an area where we could make a difference. However, if we're talking more at the population level, or we're talking more about like building a health promotion intervention, the problem is bigger. There's more variables that are added in. And like I said, that can be very overwhelming, and it's just easier to focus on like sugar as the cause of obesity or whatever, or like, you know, even just like looking at mental health as a cause of homelessness. That's not the only cause, right? That's one thing that's associated with it, but it's not the only cause, right? Group model building is like working in a group to build a conceptual model, often visual, that helps us see the problem and how different parts of a problem are connected with each other, right? So the outcome of group model building is building a conceptual model of an issue, as part of jointly understanding the problem and identifying ways to address the complex issue, right? So that's what the Foresight Group in the United Kingdom did when they helped come up with the obesity systems map back in 2007. And so this was the result, this resulting conceptual model, but each of these little boxes represents a different evidence-based cause of obesity that's then been grouped into different categories where we see how much interaction there is between different parts of the system, right? And it's not just like eat too much and exercise too little leads to obesity. That's not a group model, right? Or that's not a conceptual model. I guess it is, but it's a very simplistic conceptual model. In model building, we try to like pull out all the components of the system and try to map out how they relate to each other. And from that, and especially through talking with our population and understanding our population really well, because each population kind of has, and each person kind of has their own conceptual model of what's leading to their health or their current behaviors. Once we understand that, then we can start, like I said, working with our population to figure out like what's a lever I can pull that's maybe going to affect a bunch of different parts, or that's really going to start like shifting the system. And then a big lever we can pull that's kind of behind the system is our understanding of the system, our paradigm for the system, right? How are we looking at obesity? How are we looking at mental health issues? How are we looking at homelessness? Are we just using simplistic reductionist viewpoints, or are we embracing complexity, right? And then embracing the fact that a lot of those, everything I just said, is a societal problem and not just an individual problem. Are we looking at it that way too, right? And from that, we can start pulling out solutions, okay? So questions that can help group model building is like, what exactly is the problem? Where did it start? What are all its causes? And then that can help you build the original conceptual model. And I would say, how are causes linked to each other? That's important too. I'm going to add that in. How are the causes linked to each other, right? So you have all these causes, all these different causes of a particular problem. It's not just that all those causes are leading to a particular outcome directly. It's not a direct relationship. Usually it's all these different causes are like affecting each other, right? You want to build arrows usually into your conceptual model as well to show how all these things are linked together. And again, from that, then we can start thinking about how can we approach it. I know it's a bit overwhelming to do this work, but like, what's the point of doing health promotion if we're just scratching the surface? If we make a difference for a week and then everything goes back to the way it was before, what's the point? What's the point in wasting all this money, all this time, all this effort to just keep ending up in the same place over and over again, which is what we're doing with a lot of these complex issues, right? So I'm not saying that I'm definitely not saying that using a complex systems approach is always going to just find the perfect solutions to a problem. What I'm saying is it's going to get us further than these reductionist approaches. So one more thing about group model building is that it really, like, group is a big part of this term, right? That teamwork is key. And actually, like, and that's why, like, building trust and building relationships is so important as like a precursor to a lot of this work, which is again something that, Indigenous ways of knowings have always promoted, is like the importance of relationships before you do anything, right? With group model building, it's like about getting to know your team, building those relationships, being open to different perspectives, right? Being open for people to actually, tell you what they really think and what's really going on for them, which requires trust and openness and a non-judgmental approach, right? But in group model building, there's different techniques that you can use, but we're trying to like get to a common language, right? And to understand the dynamic nature of a problem, right? It's about creating a consensus view about which model of the system of interest can be constructed. And once we have a shared view of the model of the system that can be constructed, then we can start talking about solutions. Then we can start being like, well, this area keeps coming up, or there's this mental model that I feel that's at the bottom of this. And in all my conversations with my population, this mental model keeps coming up, and it's stopping us from getting anywhere when we're actually rolling things out. That's a mental model that we have to approach perhaps in our marketing campaign to make the actual implementation of our health promotion strategy that more effective. Okay, now what? So now that you have embraced that your issue is complex, please, as a rule of thumb, your issue is complex. And once there's a shared understanding of the problem, maybe through group model building, then you can start figuring out like, okay, which levers should I try pulling, right? And then you can like look at the research, talk to your population about the best like levers to pull and what we think is actually going to be able to work. And we'll talk about this later in the class, then you can start thinking about like, how do we implement something based on all the things we just figured out, and in a way that's actually going to be taken up by our population and that can actually like roll out effectively and then ideally be scaled too, right? And that's something that we can use implementation research to figure out like now that I understand my population really well, I understand the complexity of the situation, but I've started to identify areas for intervention, and I'm going to put them together into this packaged intervention. Now, how do I actually roll it out? And then, very important, evaluate. So you can see what's actually happening in practice, and then you can make modifications so that program can run even more effectively. Okay, so hopefully that's a good intro into complex systems thinking in health promotion. It's a lot, and it's kind of jarring, I find, when I first started learning about this, because it's like, oh, things aren't just simple. Things aren't just like cause and effect, or even just associations. It's not just like this leads to this, so we have to stop doing this. It's not just that simple. It's not. That's the answer. And you can choose to keep looking at your life and health problems and your behaviors and the behaviors of others through a simplistic viewpoint. But I'm telling you right now, that's not getting us anywhere. And it's also, I would argue, stopping us from embracing the complexity that exists between different kinds of people, and celebrating diversity, because people are inherently different and there's nothing wrong with that. We're just different. So like, let's embrace that and like get excited about our differences and know that like, different things work for different people, and that's okay. And different things work for different populations, and that's okay, right? There's no often right or wrong when it comes to complex systems. The only big wrong in complex systems working is to look at a problem simplistically. That's the big wrong, but we're not going to do that in this class. Okay, so I'll see you in the next module.